The U.S. is not supporting a no-fly zone. They've said that they don't want to be the intermediary between those Polish MiGs and Ukraine. What can we expect from these NATO summits?
Jose, it's always good to be with you. And man, what a stark split screen difference we see with those crowds supporting Putin on the ground there in Russia and the brutal scenes we have seen unfolding in Ukraine getting worse week by week. Look, the timing of the president's visit here to Brussels really couldn't be more crucial and probably couldn't come fast enough, according to the folks on the ground in Ukraine. We know those meetings he's going to have with NATO member partners and NATO member nations there is going to focus largely on what an additional military response could be. We know the goal has been to give the Ukrainians everything they need to continue to be effective defensively. And so far, White House officials tell me here they believe it's working. They believe that is why the Russian advance has not been as successful as it could have been in those early days and why the Ukrainians continue to be able to keep them at bay. But they know that more help is needed, even as they maintain a no-fly zone is a no-starter. They believe there's a stark difference between providing Ukrainians with what they need to defend themselves and U.S. troops or NATO troops directly engaging with Russian troops on the ground. So that remains a firm red line for them right now. And of course, there's also going to be meeting with EU partners and G7 nations. That's going to be the forum, White House officials tell me, where they figure out if additional economic sanctions could be ramped up. We already know they have passed unprecedented, devastating sanctions against the Russian economy and Russian oligarchs. Could more be done? Those are the questions they're raising, and they're going to try to answer there. And as you mentioned, now the president also adding on a trip to Poland. And this has been something White House reporters have been asking for days, is how close will he be able to get to see the impact of this war? Poland is about as close as you can get. No other country has taken in more Ukrainians fleeing their nation than Poland right now. And we should mention, Jose, this is as the humanitarian crisis only gets worse. You're talking about more than 3.5 million people who have fled that country, over 1 million people a week. And now we have new numbers from the United Nations over this weekend saying they believe about 6.5 million are internally displaced, meaning forced from their homes. That brings the total number of people who have had to leave their homes in Ukraine to about 10 million in the last 3 weeks. Jose.
In 3 weeks. And when we hear talk of war crimes and a war criminal, what exactly does a war crime mean, and what implications would that have?
So I am not a legal expert, much to the disappointment of my parents, but I will say international prosecutors and folks who are familiar with the work of the International Criminal Court, which is one of the bodies where those kinds of charges could move forward. That's the legal definition prosecutors have to be able to make. And I think President Biden has been under a lot of pressure to ramp up some of the rhetoric, to see how it is they're viewing Putin at this time. And we have all seen civilian areas being targeted. We've seen the bombing of hospitals, the bombing of a theater that was clearly marked children, indicating there were children among those sheltering there. Now, in the last 24 hours, the bombing of a school where we know people were sheltering. There's no question that civilians are caught in the crossfire. I think the legal definition of saying these were targeted deliberately and Putin was behind it, something prosecutors will have to figure out. But I will say, experts also say that forced displacement could also be a war crime. And there is no question about that part of the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine.
Amina Nawaz, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I so appreciate your time.